Thanks very much, everybody, for coming to your pre-port session, I suppose is the best way to look at it. End of the day, I'm extraordinarily grateful you're still here with us. And I'm hoping that today we'll have a good opportunity to bookend a lot of really active conversations today on the whole discussion around impact in knowledge exchange. And we have with us today a panel who have very, very kindly agreed to kind of help actually kind of provide some input to the activity that their institutions are working in relation to impact. We have three panelists who are joining us today. So I have Anne Thorst-Melby. Spell that. Sorry, my pronunciation is terrible. I appreciate that. Nick Hussin from Edinburgh and Amanda Shepherd from Charles Sturt University. And facilitating today will be myself. I will be introducing the session and kind of doing the general kind of run around. And Karen Kay from University of Birmingham, who will be also kind of helping facilitate the conversation. So just by way of introduction, and this is the glasses bit. Anne is the head of research documentation at the University of Southern Denmark. Department covers pure open access, bibliometrics and research data management, and has since 2022 been the chair of the Danish Pure User Group. Okay. Amanda, over there. Amanda is the data and reporting manager in the Office of Research Services at Charles Sturt University in Australia. She leads the team responsible for capture and reporting of research data for internal and external evaluations, including research outputs, engagement, and impact. She has worked in research administration for 15 years and has been a pure user and administrator for 5 years. And Amanda is the current chair of the Australia and New Zealand Pure User Group. So we have a recurring theme here. And Nick Hussin has just started in the role of Research Information Systems Manager at the University of Edinburgh, but has been there for a lot longer than that. And in this role, Nick works to ensure the university's research information systems run smoothly and fulfill the business requirements of the university's research community. And I don't have a briefing for Karen, so at some point I'll ask her to introduce herself, if that's okay. Brilliant, okay. Right. Here goes. So just by way of introduction to today's session, okay, so we've talked a lot today about knowledge exchange and impacts as a general kind of facet of research activity. Knowledge exchange, of course, more specifically, acts as a kind of contributing factor towards impact. It's very unlikely you're going to be able to do impact without knowledge exchange. That's one of the reasons why we're kind of including this in terms of our kind of conversations and thinking around here. That knowledge exchange activity is designed specifically to ensure that researchers and research users are able to kind of engage with each other together in order to be able to kind of exchange ideas, experiences, and skills in terms of what they do. And the resulting evidence from such activities is a clear driver and indicator towards the development of impact in its multiple forms, impact case studies and various different kind of forms and formats. And as I mentioned before, impact doesn't just happen magically. It tends to happen as a consequence of action, which typically becomes from research knowledge exchange. So in terms of what Pure does in this case here, Pure provides that kind of holistic kind of sort of support for the gathering of activity information, knowledge exchange information, and allows us to be able to kind of use that information to be able to kind of drive the evidencing and impact within the system. And it's one of our main Pure focus areas in 2023. As I mentioned, we mentioned the roadmap slides specifically, and we want to work very closely together with the Pure community and be able to kind of drive this. So we want to listen, learn, and understand about what needs to be done to be able to kind of make these kind of key improvements as we go forward in this particular space. So that's my introduction in terms of what I asked our panelists to be able to kind of talk to today. So we were interested in looking at the why and the how of impact in institutions in general terms. So what have been the main drivers for impact evaluations and the extent to which Pure has potentially supported successfully or otherwise within those institutions? If possible, some ideas or some examples of good KE and impact management institutions, and hopefully a sort of discussion around the greatest unmet need that exists around evaluation of impact and research. And that can be sociological, it can be technological, depends on the nature of it. And we also wanted to understand the what. So in terms of what is required in this particular case here, of specific interest are the inputs, what information is needed to be able to kind of form the inputs to impacts in general kind of terms. What are the outputs? What does that data need to be then sent once it's been assembled and curated appropriately? So what is it used for? Is it used for, say, showcasing a portal for distribution to research funders or governments in terms of compliance needs and so on and so forth? What are the processes associated to be able to kind of manage impacts within an institution? Who's involved in that? Who are the actors? What is the actual kind of requirements within there? And what data? So what data is out there? What data within the landscape can be used to help support this kind of idea of impact in general kind of terms? So that was our kind of lead in for the session here. So I'm actually now going to invite Anne to come up and do a very brief discussion. So hopefully the slides will come up here. Right? Green button. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this. I'm trying to give some inputs from the Danish side and what we do at our university, and we don't do a lot, just to shortcut the discussion. But I mean, impact, everybody's talking about it, and we have to figure out what to do about it. So I took a look at what the Danish research funders, what they wrote about the research impact. And here are sort of the 5 issues that they have mentioned in the material. And I don't think that it's any difference from whatever happens in your country. So I mean, it's just, I don't want to go over it, but because it's not that interesting. It's more interesting to see what we do about it. And what have we done at the University of Southern Denmark? Well, a few years ago, we switched on the impact template, and then we just closed our eyes and said, oh, is anybody going to find it? And if they do, what do we want to do with it? And yeah, so here goes. We still think it's new to us, and we still don't know what to do about it, and so we're still fumbling about it. We have 160 entries, and I looked over them, and then they varies in every direction. Anybody can go in and create an entry. So, but mainly it's research support officers, and it's mainly from our science faculty. Who there's a person sitting there every morning, monitor their press clippings, and say, I think this is impact, and then they make an entry in Pure. But then there's also some researchers popping things in. And as James also mentioned, and what we have been talking about is when is it an impact and when is it an activity? And I think I'm not the only one who's confused there. So I looked into it, and I find that one impact entry was briefing a politician about the security policy. There's also one who mentioned that impact could be a panelist in some debate, and I was just, isn't that an activity? So, I mean, if they're confused, we're confused, how to go about it. So I think some of the challenges here is that impact comes in many sizes and in many shapes. So how can we measure it? And I asked our research support officers, when you make a research application, what do you do about impact? And they write a story about saying, oh, if you support this research, then we aim to impact this and this and this. And I mean, how can you measure that? It's just, it's words, and it's hard to go about. So, and then there's the problem that a lot of impact happens after the research project has ended. And maybe the researcher is long gone, he has changed the university, and then whose responsibility is it to pick this up and then put it into Pure? Or where? So, I mean, there's a lot of questions here. And when do you realize that you have made some impact? I mean, we can all say, oh, I'm on stage today, so I've made some impact on you guys. Maybe not. Maybe you just want to go and drink some port. I don't know. I mean, and then you're sitting here because you're so polite people and say, woo! But I mean, what do you do with it? When is it an activity and when it's an impact? And then I came up and say, impact is when research lived. So, but how do we measure it? So, I know that there's some work being done in Denmark. There's a Danish University Association, and they have formed a working group with research support officers. And they're sitting there and they're thinking about what to do with this impact. And luckily, one of them was from my university, and he thought, I'm going to write the Pure office and say, maybe they know something about impact. And I was just, yes, how nice that you reached out for us. But the meeting is first until next week, so I couldn't bring anything. So, I mean, but yeah, I think that mainly the impact thing in Denmark, it's funder-driven. So, I mean, we can have all our bright ideas and what to do about it, but I mean, it has to be a demand from funders before the researchers want to do anything about it. So.
Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge my colleague Dale Curran, who actually put these slides together, and she's our research impact expert at Charles Sturt. And I guess just what you're going to see is a little bit of some of what we do at Charles Sturt, but also I guess the outcomes of the discussion that happened at our recent Pure User Group, like our annual user group conference. And so some of the stuff that you'll see up here is a bit of a mishmash of what came back from all of the universities who were actually using the impact module. And it is 3:30 a.m. at home, so I have got notes in case my brain starts buffering. So, okay, so in the Australian context, knowledge exchange is actually referred to as engagement. So terminology, it's one thing already. So I guess the key drivers in terms of pushing universities to evaluate their engagement and impact activities. So we have government assessments. So in Australia we have, I guess, the equivalent of the UK's REF, which is the engagement and impact assessment, currently planned for 2024, but judging by what happened with ERA, who knows? And I guess one of the challenges with that too is that, Dale's noted there that evidence of both of these things is provided as narratives and case studies for a field of research and assessed by expert panels. But in terms of what's actually supplied, the goalposts do sort of move a bit because we are kind of in the infancy of measuring engagement and impact in Australia. So we also have internal performance measures. So including for academic performance and promotion. So internally at Charles Sturt, we're currently developing a performance system. It's called the Research Productivity Index. And so engagement and impact activities are included and assessed in that, and academics are awarded points. So Pure is a key tool for us in being able to collect and report on that. So we do currently use the existing impact template for that, and we're sort of making adjustments in another area of activities in Pure to sort of try and customise something that we can use to capture what's known as a major engagement. So we also have external rankings, so QS Sustainability and the THE Impact rankings, and so then grant funding, marketing and stakeholder relations as well. And so it's worth noting that in Australia that the narratives and case studies for engagement and impact are submitted separately. So we need the Pure system to be able to reflect that and not sort of conflate the two things together. And we want it to be clear for our academics that which types of activities need to be entered into which place so that they're not sort of, like we've talked about, putting things in impacts where they don't belong. So, all right, let's get to the next page of my notes. So just up here on screen we have, so it's only a small screenshot, so apologies about that. But there's just a couple of examples of impact case studies at Charles Sturt. So on the left we've got our Pure portal entry, and it actually does go on quite a bit from there because under activities there's probably at least 15 activities that went with that impact. But as you can see, it's mostly text-based with links. We've got some keywords in there, and we kind of had like the countries where the impact occurred. So, a few issues there with the template for impacts there in Pure. Whereas on the right, we've got our website. So it's a bit more, I guess, visually engaging. We've got that capacity to put, the related SDGs, any other icons on there, testimonials. And in some cases, we've got videos from our researchers talking about their work. So really easy for someone coming to this page on the website to be able to kind of engage directly with that impact and sort of understand the story of it. So we'd like to be able to capture and display this information more thoroughly using Pure, so that we don't have to kind of duplicate our efforts in producing a showcase piece for the website or for, a reporting submission like EIA. This is about what we discussed at the Australian Pure User Conference. And so we asked universities how were they using the Pure module and what changes they've made to fit it to their use. So not all Australian universities are using the impact module either, but those who are have made changes, which largely centre around capturing more detail to align with the EI assessment, making the form more user-friendly for our academics, and working around that lack of a revalidation workflow, which can be quite limiting. So that's one of the challenges of that. If you want to go through a level of curation before making this available on the portal, because you want it to be, if you've got external people coming to look at it, you need to have that workflow on there, but then the problem is that locks the record down and they can't actually add to it. And as we know, with impact, it's not kind of a static, it's something that can develop more over time. So it's limiting that capacity for researchers to be able to continue to add to that. The other thing is that the module also doesn't require entries to have a set date or period, which obviously can make it challenging from a data perspective if you don't know when these things happened. So in terms of input, so this is just sort of going through some of those questions that James posed before. These are some of the additional pieces of data that we'd like to see included. So that's in addition to what's already collected in the module, so the original research, the researchers and the associated activities and outputs, so the things that kind of come standard with the impact template. So the fields in the module, the reflection was generally that allowing the academic to write a narrative was useful, but without the context provided by these additional indicators, the key information wasn't able to be entered intuitively. And one of the really critical things is that for all of this, that we're actually able to report on it as well, because that's another one of the challenges that we have, is that you can make modifications and add fields, but you can't always report on that, and that can make it really challenging, when you're going to do a submission. So some of the ideas that came from the ANSPUG conference on how a system could support evaluating impact. So some of these are shown up here. So again, it's important to distinguish between engagement and impact. So they're basically two kind of different parts of the assessment here in Australia, so we don't want them sort of smooshed together. Our researchers are time poor, so any way that we can have the system that can support them and have their needs in mind in terms of interacting with it would make it more effective. And so also the fact that impact evaluations are used for a variety of purposes. So, the template needs to be, or the module, whatever, needs to be flexible enough to account for that. The ability to build an evidence portfolio in one place. So we talked a little bit about the revalidation workflow, allowing that to continue to build that evidence. That would be really useful. Being able to track a case study through its journey and flag in as a possible case study. So being able to pick that up at particular points along the way, so that you're not sort of waiting until you get to the point of submission before you go, well, what are we going to put forward as a case study? But having those early flags in place would be really useful. I think we've touched on in other sessions having a wider range of templates available for those different impact case study categories. Reporting, as I've mentioned, there was one that was suggested as a big ask, but anything that helps the researchers to think about research impact, not just a system to deposit that evidence. And I guess one of the other things someone else just mentioned too was about the possibility of milestones. So having that put in to provide those trigger points for someone to go in and add that information that's needed. So I think that's actually me. Yes? Oh, this is a picture from the conference. Apparently none of us know how to look at the camera, but there you go. Thank you.
So I'm Nick Tairaini Hussain, and I'm new to the role of Research Information Systems Manager with the University of Edinburgh. And I think James asked me to kind of present on this or help along with the panel because I'm also the co-chair of the Activities and Impact Working Group for the UK User Group. So it's a good opportunity to highlight that we need some changes to the impact module in Pure, but I'm going to talk about what we're doing at the University of Edinburgh at the moment. So impact at the university. So we submitted You've heard of REF 2021 throughout the day, so you'll hopefully know what that is. It's an assessment exercise. We submitted 184 impact case studies for REF 2021 across the 28 units of assessment. And there was a lot of work, obviously, involved in that. We had 2 units of assessments with 100% 4-star for their impact submission, and a number of units of assessments who had over 80% 4-star for their submission. So a lot of work, because this was 184, the ones that were selected, but there were obviously others that had been worked on and were deselected. We have the Research Impact Network. We're big on networks in the University of Edinburgh, can you tell? So we have the Research Impact Network in the university, and it brings together the impact administrators and managers across the university. And after our REF submission, we had a review of the process for impact tracking or collection or planning or preparation, and eventually the submission. And as a result of that, we've updated our guidance, and we've looked at our processes and tried to understand what was needed for the tracking of impact. So I've got, in the next slides, just to try and fit in what the structure that James used, I'll be looking at those. So if we're looking at inputs, we've said that we want to have information to support the capture end-to-end for impact. So we're looking at, trying to identify the people for internal and external participants, for example, that are involved in the impact, the beneficiaries of that impact, the collaborators of that impact. We need a way of collecting that information. We need to be able to find or collect information about the status or the stage that the impact is at, whether it's at planning, as Australia has said, implementation, is it evidence collection, what stage is that impact at? We need to also collect underpinning research about that holds up that impact. And then the evidence, you've got different types of evidence that you need to collect. You need to have user evaluation, for example, data, testimonials, policy papers, all that needs to be collected. And then we have a narrative then that we need to pull all that information together. So it's a big job, and it's a lot of information that you actually need to build a good case study. So people have told me, because I've never done it. But yeah, apparently this is what's needed, right? Outputs. So as many of you have said, we need impact included in funding applications now, so there has to be an element of planning for impact when you're looking to get funding from funders. For assessment, we've got REF 2021. We'll have the next REF. Impact will be an element in it. We've been trying to plan for that as well. We've got performance reviews happening within the university. Now, when we talk about performance reviews in the university in relation to impact, we're not talking about how good you're doing, but how much support do you actually need to be put in place so that you can explore the impact. That is the angle that we're taking for this. And in terms of esteem as well for the university, we want to demonstrate that the university's research is current, is relevant, and is of value to society. So we need to be able to show that our research has impact. In terms of process, this is what the administrators and managers want. They want to be able to have a place to store their brain dump. Okay, so initial ideas about impact, identifying the needs for the support, for example, identifying possible internal collaborations, for example, but you need to have that initial stage. And then you go to formulation. So then you're looking at potential areas to explore, and then identifying collaborators, for example. And then tracking what has to happen, what is happening, what needs to happen. So all that needs to be in there for the tracking mechanism for impact as well. And then you get to the stage for collation. So pure is good for collation, but for the first two, possibly not so good, which is what people are saying to me. So once it's all done, you then collect everything and put it into pure. So it's a repository of information. But in terms of tracking the process, they find that quite lacking. And then you've got the data as well. Got multiple sources for impact data, multiple impact pathways as well. You're working with so many different subject areas, different types of ways of working for researchers, that they will have different sources and different times that they will collect impact information, different sources that they're collecting from as well. Formats, multiple. Got browser pages, yeah. You need to be able to collect archive browser pages, for example, email correspondences, you know, those sort of things, videos, images, all sorts of formats you need to collect in terms of building an evidence base for your impact. Storage, pure, question mark. I do like pure because it's secure, yeah, you can restrict access, but in terms of editing the items that have been stored, that could be a bit tricky. In terms of actually storing it in the first place, that could be a bit lengthy as well, the process. There's a big preference in our university for the use of SharePoint, just because people are familiar with SharePoint. And my argument has always been that you're moving the data entry from Pure to SharePoint. So why it's so good about SharePoint, right? But people like SharePoint, it's easy. Drag and drop seems to be very popular. So that makes it a big draw for researchers because it's a time-saving thing. But they also still use shared and personal drives, which we're trying to encourage against. Access, so who has access to the data? Is it the researchers? Is it the administrators? Is it the managers? Who can go in and edit that data? Does it have to be administrators on behalf of them, bringing into question the validation workflow status for pure records? Or can researchers go in and do it themselves? Is it easy for them to reach the impact records? Because some researchers say to me, I put it into Pure, but I don't know how to get to it now. That could be a question as well. So you need to make it easy for people. And then you've got the question of security as well, which for us is huge. So testimonials, you want to be able to make sure that nobody sees them. You've got to keep them confidential. Other types of information as well, that, you know, contact information for collaborators, for example. You need to make sure that that's confidential. There's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that the impact tracking process and management happens smoothly and actually happens on behalf of researchers and for research administrators and managers. James also talked about the greatest unmet challenge, and for us we've got two challenges. One is engagement by researchers. So you've got some researchers who are very keen, wants to record everything, and some researchers who says, don't try to hold me back, right? I need to be free. I need to explore. I can't be held down by data entry. Fair enough. So engagement by researchers, that's a challenge, okay? How do you get them involved? How do you get them enthused and, you know, see why it's necessary for them to start collecting this information and the process? And also, one of the challenges is the system. So we've got Pure, but does Pure fulfill all the requirements that we need? That's the question.
Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Karen Kay. I am the Research Information Manager at the University of Birmingham. I've worked with Pure for a decade now, I think. And I'll go, so I empathise with everything all three of you have said. Thank you. I think that was really interesting insight into how we've been thinking about impact in Pure up until this point. I mean, we've heard about impact all day, haven't we? And I think it's really amazing that actually for a part of Pure that maybe hasn't been developed in the way that we have seen other parts developed, it is obviously a real focus for a lot of people. So I've got a couple of opening questions to ask all of you. The first one really is, what is the impact of impact assessment on your academics?
Okay, good question. So I guess at the moment for us, it's because it's sort of fairly well in its infancy. It can be seen as another thing that they have to do, another barrier to them just getting on with the job of actually doing their research. And they can also be a bit feeling like they're having to prove themselves. So that can be the challenge in getting them to sort of step back from that defensive position and to start to think through, well, actually, this is a way I can demonstrate the value of my research. Yeah.
Well, we've had several focus groups with our academics and asked them, you know, how would you feel about impact assessment? And the burning question for them is, what is the objective of this assessment? What's it for, right? Is it tied to our performance review? Or is it for the university? Or is it for that I get enough support for my research? So if we can tie it to an objective that makes sense to them, then they'll respond. That is the understanding that we have.
And you're fairly early on in the process of using impact. Have you seen an impact on the academics about using it?
The only impact is when the funders, they ask them to do it. So, I mean, it's all for the money. And in Denmark, we at the moment, we don't have a research assessment. It was cancelled in December. So we are also in between. Nobody knows what is going to happen. So we try to be there and we try to be upfront. But as long as we don't know what is going on, then it's hard to get people involved in this, I think. So, yeah.
So I think one of the things that came through in all of the presentations, it's certainly a feeling I have, and I'm sure others do, is this kind of misunderstanding, conflation between an activity in Pure, a kind of a knowledge exchange, engagement, as we also are starting to call it that, and an impact. And I think I would be interested to hear what you think we could do to improve that when we're thinking about kind of the relationship between knowledge exchange planning, delivery, assessment, and then the impact. How can we improve so that we don't get that confusion between the two?
So I guess education is the key. And so I think definitely in Australia we're starting to see more of dedicated positions that work like specifically with impact, or you might have someone who's engagement and impact focused. And so their role is to then go out and provide that professional development to the academics and to help them understand that distinction. And I guess that's been one of the things that since we opened up the impact template, that as we see things coming through that aren't impact, we can provide that feedback loop to them and go and sit down and say, well, actually, let's talk this through and figure out what's the best way to represent it, because it definitely should be captured. It just doesn't need to be it can be an impact that has those things linked to it, but not in that impact template.
Yeah, I think for us, conversation as well. So, look, they were engaged enough to actually create the record in the first place, right? Yeah. So that's first step, tick. Now, second step is to get them engaged to understand the difference, right? And then if you can get them on board, the challenge is to get them to become your champions, your local champions for impact. So if you can do that, that would be magic. That would be really good. But yeah, we get that a lot. Activities people think are impact and not, but it's conversation starters.
Yeah. But I think it also depends on how you have organized the Pure workflow, because at my university, it's my team who follows. We have import candidates from Scopus every week, and then we import the publications. So most researchers are used to, just once a year go in and check is everything there, and then. I mean, so Pure is not, they know it's there and they know they have to relate to their Pure profile, but it's not something that they do every week. So, I mean, it's also a matter of talking about it and try to be more accurate about it. And still it's early days and what is impact? Activities hasn't even been mandatory at our university. So, I mean, so as long as we don't do that, publications is mandatory and they know about that and they know that they need to publish, but they don't know about the rest of it. It's not interesting. And there's enough administration as a researcher today. So I don't think that this is a focus point.
Super, right. So I've got a great big long list of questions, but I'm conscious of time and I want to give a chance for anybody in the audience that's got a question for the panel. If someone wants to... Oh, good, we've got a few over here.
First, right. Thank you for that. Really, really interesting to hear the discussion. I wanted to ask a really controversial question to the panel. And you're each only allowed one answer. What is your biggest driver for recording impact?
That's a very good question. So you mean as in from a research administration perspective or from the researcher's perspective? Okay. I would say it's almost the marketing, the showcasing angle, because really it's, you know, you're always striving to find that way to differentiate yourself from another university, and being able to demonstrate that you have real world impact is really critical to that, because that's how, you know, the outside world is seeing you, and that's what's going to bring the students and the collaborations and so on. So, yeah.
That's a really hard one, Uma. Because that's what researchers ask us, right? Why are you pushing us to do this? What's the reason for this? Is it just because you want to make your lives easier for the preparation for the next ref? Right? Or are you really, really committed to showing that your university has produced great research and has value for the community? That could be another reason as well. Depends on the time of the year and what year it is. Is that good enough? Yeah.
I think it depends on giving the full picture of the researchers, and I mean that's a professional aim, just to try to say that a researcher is more than just a publication.
We have another question here.
Thank you. So one of the drivers, I think, for moving to impact was that our previous metrics for measuring academics were very introspective on one point, but it was also gamed incredibly by researchers to get promotion, etc. With the shift to impact, and it's probably a question for those from the UK area, have you seen any gaming from researchers on impact and promoting themselves, which is out of line with what the Institute sees? And maybe for Edinburgh, because I think in your presentation you took it further than just the Institute, but down to researchers' performance and their own management within the Institute.
I don't know, but I'll ask my research impact coordinators and managers, colleagues to think. But then it is quite difficult because the case, I think it is more difficult to game impact because there's so many factors and elements that you have to collect around the impact. So it depends on what your definition of impact is. But if you go by, you know, the collection of evidence and, you know, the actual embedding of that research into your policy and your culture, how do you do that? How do you game that? So I think that's the impression that I get anyway. Right or wrong. Other institutions might disagree.
I think it's a very interesting integrity question. Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because my personal view on that is it talks a little to the process associated to the validation of evidences. Just because I was at a conference, as you know, as Anne said, just because I was at a conference, I didn't provide impact, right? But I could argue that I did ask someone if it was good, and they said yes, and that is my evidence, therefore, to support that. So, to what extent is the process driver around validating the evidences? So that's where the evidence planning and knowledge exchange, I think, is really important to make sure that it's actually done robustly so that the evidence can't be challenged. That's first thought.
I think that's probably a good point to end on.
Oh gosh, yes.
Because we've run out of time.
Really?
Basically.
Wow. Okay.
We could go on.
So note to self: panel should last much longer than 40 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, in which case, then I'd like to thank our panelists. And Amanda and Nick, very, very much indeed for making the effort and you know, helping us establish a better understanding of impact as a whole. And thank you very much to Karen as well for facilitating the questions. And thank you to everybody who's been involved in today's conversations. We really, really appreciated it. If anybody does want to talk about impact, one thing I am going to mention very briefly, you can shout at me, Malene, I know. One of the things we are doing at the moment, in the same way as we have an international user group that relates to award management, we are also setting up an international impact and knowledge exchange user community as well. So this session, and actually a lot of today's sessions in this impact strand, are all about trying to kind of get people thinking about how they want to contribute their own institutional thoughts, contributions, demands, needs, etc. into the process. So if anybody wants to get involved in that international group, please can you get in touch with me. We'll make some details available to be able to kind of like get a contact afterwards, and then we'll follow up on that. But just thank you very, very much indeed.